Kia ora koutou and welcome back to IMNZ's Virtual Leadership Series. I'm Tristram Clayton and we're thrilled so many of you have again decided to join us to listen to and engage with our keynote speakers. This free virtual series, which began last week with 7 outstanding speakers, is all about leadership, about stepping up in difficult times. But it's also about doing more with less and adapting to this fast changing world we all live in. As was the case last week, our 3 speakers today all know about leading boldly and being resilient during times of change. In a moment, our first speaker, Dr. Troy Coyle. But first, I'd like to introduce Suzanne Despong from IMNZ, the Institute of Management New Zealand, which has made this leadership series possible. Suzanne is now with us. Over to you, Suzanne.
Thanks, Tristram. Once again, it's my very great pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of IMNZ to the second of our IMNZ's Doing More with Less leadership events. IMNZ's been bringing hands-on real-world learning to New Zealand's business community for the past 70 years, helping transform talented Kiwis into visionary leaders. And of course, it's now more than ever that we need to support our leaders and our managers with tools that can help them step up in a really challenging time. I'll be moderating a Q&A session later this morning with Christine Watty, so I'll see you back here then, and Tristram will let you know when that Q&A session is coming up. Also though, next Wednesday, 2nd of September, we have another IMNZ webinar, so check out our website, imnz.co.nz, for more details about that. You'll also see some links during the morning session, so look out for those as well as a way to log in, and we look forward to seeing you there. That's all from me for now. Back to you, Tristram.
Thank you, Suzanne. And as you said, Suzanne will be moderating the live Q&A session, which will follow our second speaker's presentation. Now, all you have to do to find that is click the Sessions tab on the left-hand side of your screen after that presentation. Once you're there, you'll be able to ask questions directly via video or by chat, if you don't want to video yourself, or just listen in to what's likely to be some fascinating conversation. Suzanne will be present to help facilitate questions. By the way, don't forget to vote in our polls. Now, they're over on the right, near the top, next to the chat function. Once you've voted, you'll be able to see the results as they come in. So let's get on with it. Our first speaker today is Dr. Troy Coyle, CEO of HERA, that's the Heavy Engineering Research Association, and one of the most unconventional leaders you'll come across. Troy has a PhD in marine science, is a committed animal rights activist, and has a passion for transforming industry through innovation. Troy was unable to join us live this morning, but we did manage to pre-record her session, which I will now bring to you. We have that over here pre-recorded. This is Dr. Troy Coyle speaking a little earlier.
Dr. Troy Coyle, thank you so much for joining us today to speak at this Leadership Summit. Leadership is obviously a big theme of your career. You've moved between a range of roles, from animal rights activist to scientist, and now the CEO of HERA, the Heavy Engineering Research Association. Each of those moves will have no doubt been associated with a sharp intake of breath and falling back into your own confidence. It must have been difficult stepping up each time. What can you talk about when it comes to those earlier roles and how they've helped shape your approach to what you're doing now?
I think obviously every role is leading towards something in terms of continuous evolution. And I think probably with all of those different roles, including the activism, it's leading to developing what I think is quite important, which is having courage, and which I think is a really requisite requirement of strong leadership. So having the courage to be able to question things, challenge the status quo, be able to have confidence in yourself, being able to live your values, which also is something really important to me. So that's what I think. All of those previous roles were obviously leading into that kind of personal growth in me.
What helped you? I mean, I think we've all experienced that when you are promoted into a role of when you're a young new manager, a new leader, and there is that sort of, I think it's called imposter syndrome, where there's always that questioning, am I really the right person for this? How did you overcome some of those self-doubts, and how did you, and then move on into even higher roles?
I think I'm a bit of an anomaly because I don't really have imposter syndrome, and I've never really had it. I've probably had the opposite, where I've sat around the table and I've been frustrated that I haven't been recognised as being able to have a voice at that table. And I've looked around at the people around the table and thought, why not me? And I really encourage women to think that way too, because really everyone should be able to have a voice. And it doesn't, my personal view is there's a stereotype around leadership, and often the people that don't meet those requirements are left without a voice. And I strongly advocate for a diversity of voices and opinions and styles and so on to actually be considered as inclusion. I think so speaking from a women in leadership perspective, diversity gets you that seat at the table, but inclusion allows you to have a voice at that table, and I think that's really important.
A lovely answer. Can you give us some advice? Like if you have had that sort of inner confidence that you knew you were the right person to take on that new challenge, that new role, that new level of management, what advice can you give to those who are just beginning out on that trajectory and might or might not have the same degree of confidence? What tips can you give them?
I think really having a look at your own competencies and reaffirming those with yourself, because if you believe that you've got those core competencies and you've got the potential to develop those core competencies, then really there shouldn't be any reason why that inner voice in your head should be discouraging. If anything, it should actually be encouraging you. And so kind of reframing how that voice is holding you back into something that's actually pushing you forward to take opportunities.
If we flip that round, what do you look for with young managers within your organisation? What do you look to recognise and sort of as a sign that you're the people that you want to move into higher level roles?
I think vulnerability would be an important one. I know, that's kind of become a bit of a buzzword at the moment with Brené Brown's work. But I genuinely believe that it's important to be vulnerable, to have that ability to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are, what your limitations are. No leader is going to be perfect. And so being able to understand when you're not doing something in the best way possible and being able to self-assess that and respond in a different way is really important to me. I think trust is another really important thing. So being able to trust a person in all reasons, in terms of being able to do their work, being able to show up and be able to be relied upon, being able to keep confidentiality, being loyal to your organisation, but also being able to develop trust amongst their team as well. So I would look to see how that person is trusted by others too. And obviously core competencies, but in general around the softer skills, those are really two important ones for me.
How about when you're challenged? As CEO, maybe that happens a little less, but at lower levels of management, when you had to make a big call, and I know you made a lot. Just one recent one, you introduced the Treasury's Living Standards framework into your own reporting for your organisation. This is a big call, and there might be resistance to some of these big changes. How do you cope with criticism and pushback against some of these big calls?
I think it's kind of something I'm used to. Having been mainly in innovation roles, I think pushback is something that's just inherent to part of the change management process associated with innovation and disruption and transformation. So I can't pinpoint how I respond to that, other than to say that it's kind of mainstream responses to me. I think there's always pushback to major changes in thinking. And to me, it's really actually exciting to be at that forefront of doing things differently. And maybe I am a little bit addicted to that challenging process. It's such an inherent part of my personality and style to be constantly challenging the way things are done and trying new things. Doesn't mean that I'm always successful, definitely not. But I do like to try new ways of thinking or new ways of doing things.
Closely connected is obviously the what we call in New Zealand the tall poppy syndrome. Do you think it exists? Have you experienced it? And what's your advice to contend or counter it?
I'm not sure that I've experienced it myself. I certainly don't feel like I would probably be a target for a tall poppy syndrome attack anyway, but definitely at an industry level. For example, I see that if you looked at the tall poppy syndrome in terms of an industry, manufacturing is by far and away the rock star for business investment and research and development in New Zealand. And yet it just seems to be brought down continuously and not given the recognition and the status that it really does deserve. So from an industry perspective, yes, I definitely see that. Maybe what I see more is kind of like a small island syndrome that New Zealand tends to try to compare itself to, say, Australia or other countries when really it's got so much to offer in its own self that it doesn't really need to compare itself anymore, I don't think.
Now, I wanted to ask you about tough times. Obviously, 2020 has been a pretty exceptional year, often described as unprecedented. We all know it's technically not unprecedented, but it is very, very unusual, and obviously a lot of stresses and strains out there within the system, on organisations and on individuals and leaders, of course, in those organisations. Big question, but how do you contend with these stresses and strains that go on, especially in such turbulent times as we're experiencing right now?
I think COVID-19 lockdown was really hard because you're having to manage so many things with suboptimal data and really making decisions with no data at all and highly impactful decisions. So, having to think about how long is this going to go on? Do I start to make redundancies now? Do we try to just reduce our expenditure and reduce our salaries? And then risk that later on we may not have the cash flow to be sustainable. All of those things, we were doing multiple financial analyses and modelling, but really we had no basis for those models. We were just doing, 10% reduction in income, 20, 30. So it was a very difficult period. And for me, what I think was really important was having a really supportive, engaged leadership team where we were really living our values. We were making sure that we were communicating with all of our staff. We were engaging them. We weren't keeping any secrets. We were being positive, but we weren't making things look sweeter than what they actually were. And I think that built a lot of camaraderie. So we all agreed to voluntarily take a reduction in salary, including the senior leadership team. So the senior leadership team actually took their salary reduction but kept working full time, and we allowed the rest of the staff to work at a reduced rate as well. And I think that built a bit of trust and a feeling that we were all in this together. So I think even though it was a really hard time, it was actually a really rejuvenating time as well around what are our key focuses in the organisation, were we on the right track, did we have the right strategy in place, were we living our values? And as a result of this, we've been able to fast track a lot of our strategic work that was very much aligned with the difficulties we faced during COVID. For example, our increased digitalisation, our focus on trying to have more flexible work and a better work-life balance for our staff and so on. So there were a lot of positives that we were able to draw upon, and we really focused on that. And also we were very conscious that it may not be a once in a lifetime now that it's happening again. But we felt as though at that point in time, it was really a once in a lifetime opportunity to reconnect with what was more meaningful in our lives as well, and focus on family, and looking at what was really important and evaluating that for ourselves as individuals.
So I wanted to talk about that. Obviously, wellness and well-being is a couple of big but important, buzzwords has negative connotations, but they're very increasingly important concepts throughout organisations across the world. How you sort of touched on it there, but how important is that in your thinking to create an environment where well-being is at the fore? But of course, taking into account the inevitable tension between an organisation that has to have a certain revenue, has to, make sure the books are balanced, and that normally means driving your staff to work as hard as they possibly can for as the lowest revenue as possible, income as possible, as a general rule. How do you manage that tension?
We have as actually one of our HERA values is work-life balance, and the meaning of that is around work-life balance for the total person. And so we recognised during lockdown that one of the benefits of that was that it's a bit arbitrary to constrain your life around work hours of 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 or whatever, because if you are able to have a better work-life balance, you actually become more productive in your life as a total entirety. So it may mean that you get the washing out in the morning at a time that you would normally have started work, but it means actually washing gets dry and you can put it away and you don't have to worry about it, and you will still have the time to do your work as well. So it's really around what is it that's going to make us more productive in our total selves as parents, as employees, as partners, and so on. So that to me was the really exciting part of COVID-19 and what HERA took out of it. And we have now embraced much more around flexible work and working from home. And a key part of that is also having a look at the mental health impacts of that and the productivity impacts of that, because I guess flexible work comes with a presupposition or a bit of a prejudice that it's going to lead to reduced productivity. But if anything, I think that we were much more productive during the lockdown period, and we certainly we delivered a lot during that time, and we pivoted very quickly to deliver everything digitally as well.
Closely connected, obviously one of the other big issues is the generational divide or gap. Your organisation's an interesting one for that one. Obviously Generation Z, those born after 1995, are well and truly in the workforce now. How do you, and I think it is fair to say that it obviously doesn't strictly follow years of that you're born, but I think it is fair to say that there are different work ethoses and work philosophies between the different generations. How do you bridge some of those gaps from a management point of view?
Yeah, HERA is very diverse, especially in terms of our age. So, for example, our oldest employee is turning 74, and we joke that our newest employee is baby Rako, who was born to Kim but this last month. But we do have a lot of diversity. And we have a lot of diversity also in terms of technical capabilities, which I think is somewhat age-related. So, yes, we have to accommodate that. We have to accommodate people's different styles too around. Some people really like to be surrounded by a lot of people, and that kind of necessitates them being in the office rather than virtually. Others are quite fine to have communications digitally and work really well. So we had to accommodate a mixture that's going to work for everyone. In the end, we've decided that we're doing a trial until the end of this year where everyone can work flexibly during whatever hours is appropriate for them, and up to 4 days a week from home. But we all come together once a week so that everyone is reconnecting and we can have that opportunity to strategize and have team building sessions and so on. So I don't know that the age difference has had any impact on us, because we're very accommodating of everyone's styles, and by necessity that's mean that we have a little bit of every person's preferred approach incorporated into our overall approach.
Nice. I like that. Thinking of the generations, the age, it's always nice to reflect on when you were first starting out. Let's say when you got that first position of you've just been elevated to some managerial level or new position, some leadership. With all that you've learned between then and now through your own changing generations, what advice would you give back to your younger self?
I have thought about this previously because I've been asked this before, and I'm not a very good respondent about this because I feel as though all of the mistakes that I made are actually really important mistakes to have made. I think probably what I would have said to myself is to be stronger in living my values. It's something, I guess, you get that strength and commitment and confidence about as you grow older. It feels like when you're younger, you try to conform a little bit and maybe make decisions that aren't completely aligned with your personal values, which ultimately you probably will regret. So I think that maybe some of the mistakes that I made that I would want to correct is staying with organisations where I think over time you kind of meet a threshold around people's perceptions of you in terms of you kind of get stereotyped in a particular role or a particular capability, and leaving an organisation gives you that opportunity to reinvent yourself and overcome those stereotypes that might be holding you behind in your old organisation. And that allows you to then be seen in a different way, apply things that you've learned but maybe haven't been given the opportunity to apply previously. I think that company loyalty and a bit of that stagnancy around staying with one organisation too long is something that I would have changed if I had the opportunity to go back.
Closely connected. As you started out in your own leadership journey, do you recall any advice that you were given that really made a difference, or if that's hard to remember, even just a key learning from those early days as you were starting out?
Yeah, I've got so much advice that sticks in my head. I think there are two. There's one and a good, and one that's a good one and one that is a bad one. And the good one is one where a manager said to me that I tend to shock people because I'm quite demure in kind of my presentation style, but then I kind of shock people by how kind of I don't know how to describe this, but almost strongly pragmatic in my decision making and quite strong and assertive in that. And so it kind of, instead of it creeping up on people, it kind of jumps on them. So that was one thing about my personal style, is that the way I look and I sound and I talk isn't aligned with what I think and the content of what I say. And so that creates a disjunction for people, and I've had to really work on making sure that that doesn't create a shocking experience for other people. But the one piece of experience, feedback that I got that was really useful to me was a negative piece of feedback, which was very early on when I had just started out my career in Commonwealth government in Australia, and I went for a promotion, and I thought I had done really well, and my results in my job were demonstrating that I was doing really well. But the feedback that I got was that I didn't have an aura of leadership. And so, you know, I asked what does that mean, and they couldn't explain. They just said that I didn't have this aura of leadership. And that took me on a big journey of, well, what is leadership? What does it look like? What are the indicators of, you know, this so-called aura of leadership? And so I did a lot of reading and I did a lot of self-development to try to develop that. But ultimately, I think that part of the issue that we have around this aura of leadership is this concept of presence. And I don't believe that it encompasses the diversity of leadership styles that really are existing out there. And it has really no connection to outcomes at all. And so you'll see a lot of training programs on how to develop your tone of voice, to take it deeper, to make it stronger, to stand, you know, straight and on two legs rather than leaning on one, and all of those things that are really that they do convey authoritarianism, and people do have confidence in those people. But actually that's a stereotype, and I want to challenge, why do we have that stereotype? Why do we believe that those attributes indicate good leadership? Because actually there's no data to show that those attributes are contributing to good leadership. They're just contributing to confidence in leadership. So I really want to flip the conversation and encourage, especially young people who are told constantly to improve their presence, that it's almost impossible to do that without changing your own personality and your person. So why can't we actually acknowledge that the notion of leadership is wrong in terms of how we stereotypically see it? And it actually should be more diverse, because you know what? There are quirky people out there who make good leaders too.
Fabulous way to end there. What an incredibly powerful message. Thank you, Dr. Troy Coyle. A couple of lines there that really stood out. Diversity gets you a seat at the table, but it's inclusion that counts. And also, as pointed out by Anna McNichol, be stronger and live in your values. Some fascinating words, as you'll no doubt agree. Troy is an inspiring leader and someone really committed to the idea that leadership must be authentic, and allowing a degree of vulnerability and individuality are important concepts for any new or young leader. An absolutely fascinating talk. Now, we have roughly 15 minutes before our next speaker, leadership expert Christine Watty. So grab yourself a cup of coffee or head over to the networking tab. That's the bottommost tab on the far left of your screen, where you can meet other attendees as well as IMNZ facilitators. Alternatively, you can click on the polls tab on the right of your screen near the top to give you to give feedback on some of the key leadership issues that have already been raised. Once you vote, you'll be able to see the results. And of course, we'll see you back here on the main stage at 9:40. See you then.